Hello everyone and welcome to the 2022 NSF Career Proposal Writing Workshop. My name is Darryl Dickerson and I am an assistant professor of mechanical materials engineering at Florida International University. I'm happy you've been able to join this year and honored to be here with you to share my reflections on my own career proposal writing process. And I hope to be able to provide you with some strategies to help you as you work towards your future submission. Before I get started with sharing information about my approach to writing, I wanted to give a little bit of background about me. And that's because for this particular proposal, your background, your experiences, your pathway to where you are today, I think should inform your writing and provide some insight both to you and eventually to the reviewers as to why you selected your project and why you're the person to execute it. So the seeds of my work today, of course, started during my formal education. Where I received my bachelor's and PhD in biomedical engineering. So during that time, I was heavily involved in the National Society of Black Engineers at the local, regional, and national level. For me, NSBE was a powerful form of support as a Black man navigating engineering, and so I was really driven to serve, and that service culminated with me as the chair of the board of directors. Now, after completing my PhD, I began a company to translate my PhD work to clinical application, and we developed and patented biomaterial to repair the bone-tendon interface. And that work has continued since that time, and our first clinical implantation occurred last year. During that period, I joined Purdue University Minority Engineering Program as the Associate Director, where my focus was using quality improvement models to identify equity challenges, research their underlying causes, and with all stakeholders across the institution and outside the institution, co-design interventions meant to increase diversity in college engineering, focused specifically on individuals from historically excluded racial and ethnic groups. In 2019, I left that position to join the faculty at Florida International University. And I'm really proud to be here as the director of the Inclusive Complex Tissue Engineering Laboratory, or InControl, where our vision is to perform inclusive science engineering to understand multi-scale structure and function and to enable complex tissue regeneration. And to provide some information and context about FIU. We are here in beautiful Miami, Florida, in a public institution that was founded in 1965, so a fairly young institution. We have over 56,000 students, and 64% of them identify as Hispanic or Latinx, making us a Hispanic serving institution, and 12% identify as Black or African American. And within the College of Engineering, we have over 7,700 students, where 62% identify as Hispanic or Latinx and about 10% as Black or African American. And so I share that information about my background, my pathways, and the current context of my institution, because those are all elements that help guide my proposal writing. And so now I want to overview what my approach was to writing this proposal, and this comes from my organizational training. I approached writing the career proposal as the development of a strategic plan with the elements outlined on the right side of the screen. So started out with a big picture, long-term career vision in both research and education, then defining a specific project vision over a 5-year period in both of those domains, then defining the project objectives in research and education and how they related to one another, then defining the strategy, the approach, and the measures, along with the resourcing necessary to be successful. And I wanted to ensure that there was clear alignment across these elements, and also that there was alignment between the career proposal itself with my institution's and my department's mission and vision, and also within NSF. And what I mean by that is the career solicitation, which is very usefully specific, and also with the programs I was applying to. And so the programs here for me were BMMB as the primary and EBMS as a secondary program. Now, before starting the process of writing, I think it's useful to do 3 sets of activities. The first is some background reading. I mentioned on the prior slide the NSF career solicitation. Looking at it carefully can help how you frame your writing, as well as looking at the program synopses of the potential programs that you'd be applying to. And also in this realm, as you think about ideas for both research and education, looking into the literature to understand what's been done, and recommend this particularly in the education area so that you have an idea of the evidence basis you can draw on for the plans that you want to put in place. Second, you want to find your people. And what I mean by that is there are some people that will be able to help you along the way with the crafting of this proposal. One is a group that I'll call the pitch team. So you'll pitch your ideas to them to be able to get a sense of, if you're on the mark as far as what you're communicating and your thoughts as far as the sorts of impact that you can have. And I think it's useful to have both people that are within your field, and that's within your department, but also within your specific subfield, and people that are outside of your field that can give you feedback broadly. And that includes in the education area again. So if they're education folks that you can call upon, or if you're doing outreach, individuals to do outreach to be able to look at your ideas and plans, they can point you to some of the evidence bases that can support it, or tell you, what are the things that can potentially go wrong and how you can make adjustments accordingly. Your program directors or potential program directors are folks who you want to know and communicate with early on. I'll give you an idea based on the next slide when you should begin to communicate with them. If it helps you during your writing, you want to identify some accountability partners, folks who can write along with you and just keep you going along the way, because it is a long and complex process, and it's useful to have others that can drive you forward. And the last group of people is who I call the red team. So these are the folks who will look over your proposal at the very end. And they could be the same as the pitch team, or they can be some different individuals who will go in and act as reviewers and give you feedback that, like an NSF proposal review panel. And the last step before you start writing is to make your timeline, to identify all of the things that need to get done associated with both the writing and just the submission process. And I'll go through specifically the writing on the next slide, but there are also things within your institutions and for NSF that you'll need to do prior to submission, and you want to do them well before the submission date. So in thinking about making your timeline to submission, I'll walk you through my process for how I went about crafting the proposal. It started with the career visioning from the strategic planning. So really laying out the research and education career vision. On the next few slides, I'll go through some of the orienting questions that I used to be able to get to what I thought was a crystal clear vision. Then taking that vision and going through the project visioning process. So what do we need to do in order to advance things forward within the next 5 years, and getting some ideas around what kinds of projects can be done, what sorts of questions need to be asked and answered in order to be able to move forward in the vision. Then I took that information and created a project executive summary and with the project objectives, and that was about 2 pages. And the reason for that was to start to get some feedback outside of myself in a more formal way around the ideas. And so I sent that to my pitch team, which consisted of 3 individuals, 1 inside the field, 1 adjacent to the field, and 1 education individual to give me some feedback on just the writing, the communication, and the ideas to make sure that things were on target. Also sent the same things to my department chair and some mentors who were senior faculty members within the department. I also began to have conversations with the program directors to discuss the program fit. In my case, it was particularly important because the project straddles 2 programs, and I wanted to make sure that I had conversations with both, understood where which objectives fit, which ones didn't fit each program, and to then figure out how I needed to communicate about that within the proposal. The next step after getting some feedback from folks was to find and read some successful career proposals to just get some models about how people communicated their ideas and structured their stories. I think everyone's story, and reflecting on what I looked at, everyone's story and how they tell it is different. Just getting some thoughts about how that happens can be useful. Then there was the actual writing of the plan. So going from those project objectives into detailed plans with the strategy, the approach, the measures, and the resources needed in resourcing, including facilities and budget. The other thing associated with resources was getting the collaborators. So finding partners and collaborators that are necessary in order to be able to get the job done, and starting to get those letters of collaboration as I was writing the plan. Then I had my first draft completed, and upon completion, I sent it to the red team to review. And I had, fortunately, the same group individuals from the pitch team were part of my red team. Gave them about 2 weeks to do the review. And also, because I had some specific questions about budget, reached back out to the program directors about those budgeting questions to see if I was in the right ballpark, and also if some of the things associated with the budget, particularly education plan, were allowable expenses. Came back to do our revision, had a discussion with my department chair so that we could talk about what the content of the proposal is, develop further from the executive summary, and ensure that there was true alignment between that content and the letter that was being crafted. And I completed my second draft, sent it to the red team again, had them also do some careful proofreading and sent it to another person to do just proofreading work. Did the final revision and then submitted in time, which was fun and exciting. So now let's get into some of the actual strategic planning here, some of the work of this workshop. So we're going to start with the career visioning and the way I thought about this process. So you have two visions to lay out, one for yourself as a researcher in your career and one as an educator. And this is based on the positioning that you are in your organization, and also because of the requirements of the career call, the career solicitation. And so this is the prompt that I think is helpful to just very clearly articulate what your vision is. My vision for my career as a researcher is to. My vision for my career as an educator is to. And there's some questions that I recommend answering that will help you to make these statements clear. So for your research vision, some orienting questions: what are the kinds of challenges that you see in the world that your work can address? What are the kinds of fundamental and applied questions that you want to answer? What's the kind of work that you want to do, and what excites you in your field? What transformation do you envision seeing through your work? How will the field change as a result of your work? And then why is this vision important to you? Why is it important to you to do this work? And why is it important to the world that this work be done? Now, similarly, you need to do the same sort of orienting for your education vision. So what are the kinds of challenges that you see in engineering education that you would like to address? The kinds of things that you want to see changed? What are the kinds of things that you want to do as an engineering educator? So what are the things within being an educator that really excite you? How will engineering education be changed as a result of the work that you do as an educator? So what is the transformation that you see within education as a result of your work? And again, why is this vision important to you? Why is it important to the field of engineering education that your vision become reality? I think asking those questions really draws out, what are your values within this space, and it'll help you as you're working towards, doing your proposal, and that you have something to come back to on a continual basis. Now, even further for your career vision, it's important for this proposal because there must be a section within this proposal where you talk specifically about the integration between research and education. So they are not separate programs, but they are integrated programs that work together and build upon each other. So a prompt that I used in order to think about this was my research vision is aligned to my education vision in the following ways. I just listed out 3 ways in which that can happen. So I would recommend that you do the same. Figure out, what are the ways that what you stated for your research vision are aligned with your education vision. And then thinking about your own career development, thinking about, what you're doing or what you think you want to do as a researcher and what you think you want to do as an educator, and where you are currently today. So in order to achieve this vision that you've laid out, what are the ways that you need to develop? And write out 3 or 4 ideas about how you need to develop, because that will become part of the proposal itself. That will become, the reasoning that you need this career support is to develop in these ways. Now, in going through this process, there's some things that will come out of it. So you'll have some clear outcomes. You'll have your vision statements for both research and education, some very clear vision statements that you will use for your career. You will have some nice core values that you can use to filter your project vision. So as you go through the ideation process, you want to be as divergent and open as possible about the types of things that you can do. But when it comes to writing the proposal and you need to narrow down, you'll have these vision statements, you'll have these orienting questions as a way to be able to decide on what aligns with your career vision. And then also having the clear areas of development is very important. Talk about why this particular proposal, why this award is important to you and how it will advance you in your career. Now, in building towards the project vision, there are 2 questions that I asked, one for research and one for education. And these are focused on thinking about intellectual merit, which would mean advancing knowledge and understanding. So the first question for the research is, what fundamental knowledge is needed to advance towards your research vision? And for education, what systems need to be in place to advance towards your education vision? Now, these questions can be your foundation for ideating with purpose, and that's really the next step in building towards this vision is the ideation process. Now, for me, when I do ideation, I like to use mind mapping for this purpose. Now, any way you choose to do it is really fine. It's just important to be open, generally open and divergent in your thinking. Now, I like mind mapping because with software, it's really easy to move things around, to cluster and find themes and make structures. And so I can start out with this central career ideation and then expand out from there to different spokes. And so here I have on the left side your education challenges, interests and questions, the impact we want to have, and education outreach and outreach resources. And on the right side, the same sorts of categories for research. And then from there, just being open and writing down ideas, picking up items from literature and pulling that all together to really just think about what those foundational questions from the last slide, think about, how can we move towards the big picture research vision? Then after going through a really divergent process in building off ideas, taking time to cluster themes together and coming back to these 2 questions. So on the research side, what fundamental knowledge is needed to advance towards your research vision, and thinking about what can you achieve within the next 5 years to develop that fundamental knowledge? And that's based on your ideation. And similarly for your education plan, what can you achieve within the next 5 years based on what you're thinking that will allow you to create and enhance the structures needed to advance towards your education vision? Now with your project vision set, you can move towards creating your objectives and generating your executive summary. Now, you've likely noticed by now that I've crafted the research and education in parallel consistently. So my approach to the proposal was to take to heart the concept of being a leader in research and education. So I gave both aspects of my proposal the same general treatment, even though the anatomy of the work would be different. So this approach doesn't mean you're necessarily becoming an education researcher. It means instead that you're taking the same rigorous approach to the education work that you do with your technical research. And so now you're ready to pull all the pieces together for your career executive summary, and that would include the motivation for your research and education, the project vision for each, your objectives listed out, along with the intellectual merit and broader impact summary for each one. And I also have in here a section for research program fit. And I think this is important for any submission, even if you don't straddle two programs. And so here in the program fit, you want to explicitly state how and why this career award fits the program. And this was the advice from my program director. Now, again, this was especially important for me because my work sits on the boundary of two programs, and I wanted the program directors and reviewers to understand that I saw this very clearly, and these were the reasons why it fit within both of the programs. So this is why it's important to really understand the program synopses, and I didn't want the reviewers to speculate about this at all. I think even with one program, it's important to do the same thing, to explicitly state to your readers exactly how this is a fit, this work is a fit for the program. Now, having this summary in place, I think this is a good time to think about integration, the integration between research and education and the objectives, and explicitly, again, what that looks like. So thinking about how does the education work feed into the work that you're doing with the research? And in turn, how does the research impact the education work? Being able to show both, how each is connected, how each is augmented by the other, I think makes a really powerful section where you talk about the integration of the two different areas. Now, having a summary in place, I think you have a good overview of the work that you're proposing to do, and it's time to do a bit of reflection. So some reflection questions to help to understand where you are and what you need to develop within the proposal. So one question is, what makes me uniquely qualified to execute this plan? What is it about my background and my experiences, my desires, my vision that makes me uniquely qualified to execute this work? What tools do I need in order to do this work, and where are those tools, and do I have access to those tools either within my lab or within my campus or through other means? How have my prior experiences prepared me to execute this work? So what are the things about my pathway to this point that demonstrate very clearly that I'll be able to execute this work? Or if there are developmental parts of this work, how do I need to develop in order to execute? And what resources do I have or need to put in place in order to receive that development? All right, now that you have this in place, you can do some refinement on this executive summary, and this is a good sanity check for you to make sure that you have all the pieces to effectively tell your story. This is also a good conversation piece for working externally to figure out, can others see the value of the work? So now is a good time to talk to your pitch team and, let them look at it and ask them some pointed questions. You want to know, does this get you excited? If so, what made you excited? Or if not, what's missing from it that could potentially get them to really jump behind the work? And I think that's really important for any proposal, to make sure that within the first couple of pages, people are really excited about what you're putting forth as far as the work that you want to do. And the other question is, does this sound feasible? Can this be done within 5 years? And If it doesn't seem that way, then what things would they want to cut in order to make it more feasible? And that's a good data point for you. And the other folks to bring this to are your program officers. You want to make sure that you have a conversation about fit with them. They are super helpful folks, and make sure that you do not submit anything without having a conversation with them first. And the conversation can be over email just for confirmation, but make sure that there is some level of engagement. It's really important. And so now going into the actual writing of the plan, putting down the strategy, the tactics, and the measures associated with your strategic planning. So the first piece of advice I have here is to make sure that anything you want the reviewers to know, you want to tell them explicitly within the narrative. Within those 15 pages that you have, make sure it appears there. You can't count on it being appearing anywhere else for them, and you don't want to have them guessing about anything. Second, and this is really key, explain to the reviewers why you're making the decisions that you're making. You want it to be the case that even if they disagree with you, even if they would do it another way, they can see how you're thinking about the problems that you're trying to solve. And I'm going to give a specific example from my proposal. So here, the statement is, although 2D is scientifically interesting, for the study I focused on 3D given limited resources and my interest in, and there's more information about those interests. And so I put this statement in because it really would be interesting to be able to compare 2D and 3D and understand the differences in the biophysical responses associated with each. The career proposal is not, or the career award is not, an unlimited amount of funding. And so even though it's scientifically interesting, it doesn't necessarily help me answer the specific questions that I asked within the proposal. And so I wanted to make sure the reviewers knew how I was thinking about this and why I made this decision in this experimental design. Next is to make sure to provide sufficient preliminary evidence for your work. I use the word evidence here and not preliminary data because it's not necessarily that you need to have preliminary data for all pieces of your work. You just need to be able to craft an argument, and that argument of preliminary evidence can come from the literature to be able to support what you're proposing. And along with that, you want to point to evidence that will give reviewers the confidence in your ability to do the work. And these last two bullet points are really important in the context of our current world. So particularly for early stage investigators having to set up a lab during COVID, you may not have a lot of preliminary data, particularly published preliminary data, but there's likely enough that you've done and enough that you see within the literature that helps to make the argument for you, and you want to be able to be explicit about that within the proposal. So the next part of this is resourcing your plan. So going back to the reflection questions from before, what tools do I need to do this work? So where are these tools exactly, and have you demonstrated your ability to use them? If so, where? And does this appear somewhere within the narrative of your proposal? Again, everything needs to be within that narrative. So the second part, how have my prior experiences prepared me to execute this work? So you are a resources, and you should be able to connect as part of the intellectual merit and the broader impact statements, how your prior experiences have demonstrated your ability to be able to take on this work that you're proposing. So this third question, how do I need to develop in order to execute? So this question includes those techniques that may be outside of your area of expertise, and this may involve adding senior personnel for the project. Remember, you can't have a co-PI, but you can have senior personnel. If you do so, if you choose to go this route, you need to be very clear about how they will contribute and make sure that it is a limited contribution, and also how they're going to contribute to your development. So how they're going to add capacity to your ability to be able to do the work in the future. So it also needs to be clear within the text of the proposal even if that part of the project does not occur, that there would be sufficient knowledge gained to support the work. And lastly, in talking about resourcing a plan, the question is, are all parts of the plan adequately resourced? And here I'm referring specifically to the education plan. So have you resourced the education plan, your education program, with time, with people, with facilities, and with budget in order to demonstrate your ability to be able to carry forth the work? And so in speaking about the education plan, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk specifically about broadening participation and definitions for diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is something that is modified from the City of Portland Office of Equity and Human Rights. And I think these give some good definitions around each of these. And I wanted to give some questions, give some prompts as you think about placing efforts around diversity, equity, inclusion into your work. So the first question to think about is, how does diversity, equity, and inclusion connect to all of your proposed work? So not simply the education plan or the idea of broadening participation, but how does that connect to your research? And I think that can bring about some interesting ways you can integrate research and education. So who are your stakeholders here, and how are you bringing their voices into the work that you're doing so that you're working with them in order to be able to change the world around you? Thinking about what you propose and trying to figure out, are we trying to fix people, or are we recognizing the systemic issues, and what are we doing within our work to be able to change the system? What are the long-lasting, sustainable changes that we're making within the educational system that will indeed advance those who have been historically excluded within engineering? And lastly, I want to recommend that folks find expert assistance. And so there are individuals on your campuses who may be members of these two organizations, the National Association of Multicultural Engineering Program Advocates or the Women in Engineering Proactive Network. These folks are subject matter experts who can help with ideas around creating long-lasting systemic changes that connect to some of the programming interventions that may already have in place. And so I want to close by going high level and talking about the proposal and the approach and thinking about the proposal again. So this career proposal is about you and telling your story. It's telling the story of your vision for leadership in research and education and how this award will propel you towards that vision. I hope that the questions and the prompts provided here give you some insight on my process and help you towards a successful submission in July. Good luck, and I look forward to connecting with you during the workshop Q&A.